I'm Dr. Kelly, the founder, director, and one of the senior mentors with anotherdegree.com. A few weeks ago, myself and a few of our other mentors presented for a Careers in Research event with the wonderful Sanaz Nobati from the UCLA Career Center. I want to thank Sanaz for inviting us and the UCLA student audience for their attention and wonderful questions. The event opened with an overview of research careers and the educational pathways to attain them, and it ended with a 45-minute panel and Q&A discussion with 3 exceptional scholar practitioners who have cemented careers in research across academia, medicine and healthcare, applied research, public scholarship, and beyond. So the original Part 1 presentation was a bit more oriented to UCLA students and the resources available to them, but I want to take this opportunity to re-record and share it here to YouTube for a more general audience. Now, bear in mind, the event was featured as a part of UCLA's Undergraduate Research Week, so the content is geared a little bit more towards students who are just starting to consider research careers and graduate degree programs, rather than those of you who may be advanced graduate students going on the job market, or even alumni pivoting careers. Nonetheless, I hope you find this presentation valuable if you are thinking about various research careers or the pathways and possibilities that extend from gaining academic research experience. Now, if you want to hear the full panel conversation and get that firsthand wisdom from professionals working across all kinds of research careers, check out Part 2 on our YouTube channel. I'll put the link right above there. And that video is the full Q&A and advice section. You'll meet these scholars with backgrounds in policy advising, consulting, publishing, nonprofits, medicine, and scientific research. And they have a lot to share, and it's a lot of insight that's often hard to find in one place, so I hope you'll check it out. Additionally, if you feel like you need more personalized guidance as you think about academic degrees or career pathways, your university or college can offer a lot of support, but if you feel like you're still not getting what you need, you're totally not alone in that. I am available, the panelists are available, and so are more than 30 mentors. That includes practicing scientists, professional writers, tenured faculty, museum directors, tech consultants, lawyers, doctors, CEOs, and more. And you can connect with any of us through anotherdegree.com. We offer graduate and professional school admissions consulting, scholarship search and application review. We do research and dissertation coaching, as well as career consulting for academic and alt-ac pathways. Not mentioned here, but we also do professional academic editing as well. And if you're with an institution, we also partner with campuses to develop co-curricular programs, workshops, guest talks, panels such as the one at Part 2, or even small group mentoring cohorts. So you can find more info and even some special discounts in the description below. So in today's presentation, I'm going to start by talking about the various types of research to make sure we're very inclusive about the different types of research when we're considering careers in research. But we'll also talk about different types of research careers, some of the skills and dispositions, and even personal development that you can build through research experience, the educational pathways that can lead you to research careers, and how to explore various roles and understand who hires. So before we go any further, I want to emphasize that when we're talking about research, we're not just talking about lab coats and microscopes or maybe some mice. Research can mean fieldwork in living ecosystems or historical landscapes like in geology, geography, or archaeology. It can mean studying communities or individuals or organizations, running focus groups, conducting surveys, or doing ethnographic observation. It can involve statistical analysis, meta-analysis, computational modeling, simulations, or forecasting. It can include clinical trials, engineering projects, observing outer space, or studying the smallest particles of matter. And of course, the humanities, kind of often reduced, like it is here, to reading books are actually very deeply engaged in understanding human creativity, human history, culture, and meaning through looking at works of writing, art, dance, film, media, language, and so much more. All of these fields contribute to knowledge production, and they help us understand how our changing worlds work. Now, if you're thinking about research as a part of your career, there are three broad directions you can take. The first I call traditional academic careers. This is where you generate new knowledge through research. You would also be involved in teaching, mentoring future academics, and contributing to your field. These are typically what we think of when we think of professorial roles. There's also alternative academic careers, or what's sometimes abbreviated as alt-ac careers. This is where you might work with academic knowledge or even in academic settings like universities, but your main role isn't producing new knowledge. For instance, you might apply research to engineering applications, to policy, to consulting, to communications or student supports. So you might be involved in programs that support faculty, support teaching, support students within the college or the university and their success. There are also research-informed careers where research isn't necessarily the main part of the job, but you use research skills, such as writing reports, analyzing data and interpreting prior research, administering surveys, managing logistics, or communicating findings. And of course, people move between or combine these elements and pathways all of the time. So let's start with an overview of traditional academic careers. These are roles that combine research, teaching, administration, and service. But the balance depends, and the proportions depend on the institution and the role. So most of the time we're thinking of professors at colleges and universities. In the US, tenure-track faculty usually start as assistant professors. After about 6 years, they're evaluated for tenure. Now, at a research-intensive university, the focus generally is on their published research and grants in awarding tenure. But at a liberal arts or maybe a community college, teaching and mentorship carry more weight. And if they earn tenure, they become an associate professor and later may advance to a full professor. So one quick note for students, an assistant professor is not a teaching assistant. TAs, or what are also called teaching apprentices, are graduate students, whereas assistant professors already have a PhD and usually a strong research record. Now, there are also increasingly more specialized tenure line roles. These include research professors, who may be associated with an on-campus research center or institutes, and their work more focused on their research output with fewer teaching duties, especially at the undergraduate level. And also on the flip side of that, the teaching professors, whose work may focus more on instruction. And even if they are doing research, it might be related to pedagogy or best practices for teaching in their field. Then we have what are usually called contingent faculty. So these are adjuncts and visiting professors. So commonly these roles are not on the tenure track and are often involved in short-term or part-time contracts to cover a teaching gap. However, you might also see this title used as kind of like a bureaucratic move to signal that someone is affiliated with another university, but might be visiting or for a part-time affiliated with a different university or a different department in which they might have a title such as adjunct or visiting professor. Lecturers, sometimes the lecturer role does come under contingent faculty, but sometimes there are lecturer roles that are more akin to a tenure line teaching professor, where there would be something akin to continuation of employment instead of short-term contract employment. And then you have postdoctoral fellows, or what we would commonly call postdocs. These are early career researchers who work on research projects for a short term, but the term could often be a few years after earning their doctorate. And finally, many academics eventually take on administrative and leadership roles. So that might involve directing research centers, chairing departments, or serving as deans, provosts, or even university presidents or chancellors. Some leaders may come from outside of academia to these ranks. For instance, you might have someone in politics or governance become a university president or chancellor, but many do come up through faculty ranks. Now, in this slide, I'll evaluate some of the pros and cons of traditional academic careers, but we're talking about considerations that one can take into account in relation to their personal values. So whether it's a pro or con might depend on your own take on it. But to start, one of the things that I think is at the heart of the appeal of traditional academic careers is that there are very few professions where you can get the level of autonomy that, especially at the tenured level of a faculty academic, will have. If you reach that stage, you have a lot of control over what you work on, how you work, and when you work, all while still receiving a usually healthy paycheck and good benefits. So I often think of it as close to being an entrepreneur or artist, but without the same level of financial risk or dependence on market demand. So of course, that doesn't mean the world will automatically care about your work. If people don't see the value in what you're doing, it is harder to get those jobs, the funding, and the scholarships that will lead you to that relative job security in being a faculty member. And also, whether or not you personally care about status and prestige, there's no doubt that academic careers tend to carry a lot of social status and prestige across various cultures. However, the flip side of that is that some academics really struggle to pivot or consider other work that they would consider less prestigious. And also that for a lot of academic work, the motivation and incentives have to come from growing your intellectual influence rather than direct monetary compensation. So something to keep in mind. So in terms of the cons and considerations, another big thing to know is that traditional academic careers usually expect deep specialization. Now, some people love that. It's like perfecting a craft or diving deeper and deeper into a single artistic project and continually improve it. Whereas others might want more variety. So that's something you should really take to heart in considering whether you want a traditional academic career. Of course, it's also highly competitive at every single stage. So whether it's accessing opportunities to make you a strong grad school applicant in the first place, getting into graduate school, securing fellowships and grants, landing jobs, and continuing that process all over again. And of course, all along, all the people you're competing with are also incredibly smart, creative, and productive. Another consideration is this paradox around mobility. And of course, there's an academic concept for it I had to look up. It turns out it's called constrained mobility. And this indicates how academics are technically very mobile. For instance, many will qualify for skilled worker visas all around the world, but that doesn't mean you can just pick a city or country and expect a job to be waiting. Jobs are limited and specialized, so you often go where the opportunity is, not necessarily where you might want to live. And for a lot of people, myself included, that becomes a real sticking point, especially when you factor in things like family obligations or simply your personal preferences. There are also considerable opportunity costs to think about. Even in funded graduate programs, that's time that you're not earning a salary, time that you're not contributing to retirement or advancing in another career. And after the degree, there's also more time spent on the job market, building a research agenda or lab and working toward tenure. On top of that, academic hiring runs on cycles. If no one is hiring in your specialty this year, you may have to wait until the next year to try again. And while academia can offer a lot of autonomy, the flip side is that you are responsible for managing your productivity in a very competitive environment. Your identity can also become very tied to your work. You're known for what you research and teach. For many scholars, their research also comes from something deeply personal. That can be a huge motivating factor, but it can also create a lot of emotional labor, or what's sometimes called an affective burden, in that it's very meaningful work, but it can also be pretty heavy to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And of course, no talk about the pros and cons of academia is complete without a nod to PhD comics. So I'll let that comic strip speak for itself. So I hope that none of this scares you away. Academic work is incredibly important and foundational to the modern world, and growing and maintaining diversity in traditional academic careers is especially necessary. But it's also important to me that the next generation of scholars comes in with clarity and not illusions over what it involves, and also what the other opportunities are. So with that, I want to emphasize is that the good news is that research doesn't lock you into one path. It actually opens many. So in a research project that I worked on with a UCLA team, we wanted to understand whether undergraduate research in the humanities, arts, and social sciences mattered for students' later careers. So what's interesting is those are fields that aren't usually framed as career training. So we wanted to see what the data said. And what we found was really interesting. We found that 65% of the students who did undergraduate research in particular mentor guided programs went into non-academic careers, whereas 35% pursued traditional academic careers. But nonetheless, 70% of them said their research experience was instrumental to their postgraduate success, and only 5% said it made no difference. And another thing that's interesting is when we asked how much research changed their career plans, the students who reported the biggest shift were actually among those 35% who went into academic careers. So for many of them, research was the thing that opened the door to academic pathways that they hadn't seriously considered before. Now, students in that study found their research experience relevant in careers as various as being a high school principal, building an artisanal bakery and brand, and even managing a performing arts theater. But of course, there are many direct research-intensive careers as well. So here are some examples I'm going to lay out, but they're not at all comprehensive. So in medical and healthcare, you might consider being an epidemiologist or being involved in clinical studies. Even practitioners, doctors, and clinicians are very engaged in research, both the practice of research and interpreting and applying existing research. In museums and libraries, you might be a curator, an archivist, an oral historian. You might do work establishing provenance or repatriation of physical art and artifacts. Also, a librarian is an excellent way to pursue research in a very general way. I sometimes think of professors as research specialists and librarians as research generalists. In tech and engineering, of course, there are all kinds of ways you can be involved in research. Data scientist is especially lucrative and in demand right now. Human-computer interaction, UX, user experience researcher, algorithm engineers, the machine learning engineers are all especially important research-related work that you can do. In media and communication, you might decide that you want to present work to a more general audience and become a journalist or what we call a trade writer. You could become a documentarian or a podcaster. Many are also getting involved in designing courses And one thing that I see a lot coming out of the humanities is humanists getting involved in digital storytelling and development of world building games. In law and justice, there's a great need for legal historians and fraud investigators. You might be involved in doing patent law or intellectual property. A lot of law relies on historical research, but even case attorneys need to do a lot of research and develop a lot of audience and uh, evidence and, you know, communicate well in a way that really lends itself to research experience. Of course, you might get into environmental resources management, whether that's urban planning or even weather forecasting, a lot of disaster readiness. So much is being done with geospatial data and GIS. You might use it towards habitat restoration and monitoring. In the government and public sector, we have one of our panelists in the Careers in Research panel is a policy analyst, but you might also do research as a part of a think tank or be involved in governmental organizations like the Census or the Bureau for Labor Statistics. You can do demographic work in many, many contexts. And business and market analysis is also heavily involved in research. You could be a trends forecaster. A long, long time ago, after I was fresh out of college, I actually worked at L'Oreal, and we had anthropologists who would go to Paris during the summer and then report back on what they expected would be the future trends in makeup based on what they observed. These days, they probably don't go to Paris. I assume they just watch a lot of TikTok. But that's one way that you could be involved in research. Investors and financial advisors certainly are involved in research and monitoring trends and data analysis. Even being an entrepreneur, you have to do a lot of risk analysis. You have to evaluate your competitor landscape. You have to think about the logistics of inventory and staffing. So there's research everywhere. And so many of these careers, if you're doing research, you'll have a leg up for them in ways that might not always be evident from the start. Now, no matter what path you take, whether you're an undergraduate thinking about getting research experience or a graduate student exploring non-traditional options, I want to emphasize that research builds skills that employers consistently say they want. So in another UCLA study I worked on, we compared matched groups of students who were similar across things like their major, their GPA, their income, their background, transfer status, their first-gen status, and more. But we looked at differences on whether they had participated in a faculty-mentored research program or if they did not. Now, the students who did research reported statistically significant higher levels of key competencies at graduation. And that was measured both in the program exit surveys for the research programs they were a part of and in UCLA's very general senior survey, where they weren't even prompted to think about their research experiences. So those include things like critical thinking, informed decision-making from numerous sources, a desire for lifelong learning, the ability to communicate effectively in writing, a drive to achieve, and the academic ability to consolidate sources. And these competencies map closely onto the skills employers prioritize according to NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. So even with just an undergraduate degree plus mentored research experience, you're gaining strong career preparation. And just as importantly, you're getting personal development in areas like confidence, clarity, independence, and resourcefulness. Now, if you are looking toward a research-centered career, whether in a traditional or academic track or in an alternative academic path, you'll usually need some form of an advanced degree. So let's walk through the main options and what they actually involve. Now, the highest, or what's called the terminal degree for most research and academic careers, is the Ph.D., the Doctor of Philosophy. Now, a PhD is specifically designed to prepare you for traditional academic roles, but I'm a firm believer that it can also be valuable for many other career fields, and even as a personal intellectual pursuit. So I just want you to go into it with a clear understanding of what it requires. Now, first of all, just to dispel a myth, is that you can apply to a PhD with just a bachelor's degree. Now, increasingly, programs are becoming so competitive that having a master's degree can help and give you a bit of a leg up. But in many US programs, you earn a master's along the way to getting a PhD. But nonetheless, you can apply to a PhD program even as a college senior before you've finished your bachelor's. But one thing to be aware of, so if you are someone who already has a master's, or you're thinking maybe I'll get a master's just to see if I want to pursue a PhD, is that that master's doesn't automatically place you ahead in most PhD programs. So it's not like going from, say, a community college to a four-year college where you would have some credits that transfer. So there might not be any credits that transfer. You may need to redo coursework or even significantly revise your previous master's thesis. But bear in mind that the experience isn't wasted. So you'll usually come in more prepared, more focused, and more aware of the expectations. So it's not necessarily starting from the complete beginning. Now, when we say that a PhD program is funded, that typically means tuition is covered and you receive a stipend. Now, you might not have all fees covered, and the stipend is often tied to working part-time as a teaching assistant or a research assistant. However, in other cases, you might secure scholarships, grants, and fellowships that allow you to focus directly on your research. Additionally, even though PhDs are research-focused degrees, the first 1 to 2 years usually involve a lot of foundational coursework. So like I mentioned, some programs include a master's along the way, but not all do. So again, if you're unsure whether you want to complete the full PhD, you might want to look for programs that allow you to do what's called mastering out. However, I would advise you to never, ever, ever, ever say in an application or an interview for a PhD program that you are considering mastering out, or that one of the things that that brings you to the program is that they offer a master's along the way. Programs are admitting you with the expectation that you will finish the PhD. Now, after coursework and a master's program, master's thesis, if it's part of it, you'll often take what's called qualifying exams. These might be written or oral exams or both in a specialty area. Now, when you're researching potential PhD programs, it's especially worth looking into what exam areas that department or program offers and whether they allow customized exams. Because one thing that the admissions committee is looking for on their side is being assured that faculty are there who can support your interests, who can offer you exam, and who can assess your exam. And once you pass your exams, you would then go on to write and defend your dissertation prospectus. Prospectus is essentially another word for a research proposal. And after that, though you might have been doing it somewhat along the way to drafting your prospectus, but generally after that, you're officially what's called a PhD candidate and would move on to your research phase involving data collection, writing, and then eventually the defense of your dissertation. Now, the median time to completion is still around 7 years. That's for programs from beginning from the very start that might include a master's along the way. It can be shorter or longer. A lot of it is going to depend on your field, your methods, and whether you're continuing a project you might have began in undergraduate, whether you're doing something that's entirely on your own or an offshoot of what your lab or your faculty mentor is doing. and so many other things that really have nothing to do with your intelligence or your productivity. Now, if you're not interested in a PhD, there are many other programs that let you pursue research and move you into research-related careers. Sometimes even the same careers that PhD holders pursue, but that would require fewer years of schooling along the way. So the first one includes your academic master's programs, a Master's of Arts, Master's of Science. One thing to keep in mind that these are often not funded like PhD programs are, so you often have to pay the full tuition price of them. Scholarships are a bit more limited. But if your objective is largely to teach, then in some cases you can teach with just a master's in a lot of colleges. So look into what your goals are, especially if you want to teach at community colleges. You don't necessarily have to get a PhD, but you can start doing that with a master's, even if some are continuing on to get a PhD after they've already started teaching. There are also some standard master's programs with a heavy research focus. So that could include the Master of Clinical Research, Master of Data Science, the MLIS, the Master of Library Information Sciences, Master of Public Health, Master of Public Policy. There's also a growing number of what's often called specialty master's programs, and these are often unique to specific universities. So for instance, uh, I outlined here a few that are specific to UCLA, such as the Master of Social Sciences, Master of Quantitative Economics, Master of Applied Geospatial Information Systems and Technologies. Some of these are accelerated programs and can be completed in a year. And these can be really great if you want to deepen your skills and you know what particular area you're interested in, or maybe you're already working in that area and you want to advance in the field, and that master's would offer you a way to do so. They can also be something to consider if you're really not sure if you want to do the PhD, but you want something that could open up a lot of career options in a relatively short span of time. And then when you go on, decide if you do want a PhD, you already have a lot of research work and experience under your belt, but you might also decide and see, what the job market is based on your degrees there. I also want to emphasize that many professional degrees, these are practitioner-oriented programs that might include substantial research components or even combined joint degrees. So generally our professional degrees include things like a medical doctor, the MD, clinicians like the PsyD, law school, getting your JD, or business school and getting an MBA. There can even be combined joint programs like doing an MD, PhD, where you would combine medical practice with biomedical research. And there can be others that prepare you for teaching, consulting, or other applied research roles. Now, if you're trying to figure out whether research careers align with your values and what you need to obtain them, here are some strategies compiled by UCLA Career Center advisor Sanaz Nabati. So thank you, Sanaz, for these. Just to give you some brief tips, one is to carefully consider what career and degree path is right for you. And there are a number of career self-assessment tools online, including the myidpsciencecareers.org website. Also, research your careers in research. Look at the different requirements in job descriptions of jobs that interest you. You can find these on things like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Higher Ed Jobs. You can go through various universities and their career center or jobs portal like Handshake. You can also conduct informational interviews where you're getting information from someone who's in a role that you're interested in and want to know how did they pursue getting into that role and what ideas they might have for you to pursue something similar. And if you're thinking about graduate school and what outcomes might come of it, Ask faculty and departments about their graduate job placements. So sometimes this is something they really want to brag about, and certainly it's something that a lot of programs are rated and ranked on. So they may put some of this on their program website, and there might even be ways from there to reach out to some of their alumni and do an informational interview with them. And again, I want to thank Sanaz Nabati for putting together this slide and the next one on some companies hiring for various research roles. I'm happy to share these with you here, but of course, this list is not comprehensive, so you can imagine many more. And I encourage you to share your ideas for other companies and organizations that might hire in some of these areas in the comments on this video. So here's some across pharmaceutical, healthcare, market research, biotech and life sciences, tech and AI. I would also add probably Edwards Life Sciences on this screen. Government agencies, of course, always hiring for researchers in many departments. Finance and business analytics. Of course, this academic and research institution list is not at all comprehensive, but you can think about, what are those things that are like CERN or NIH, where you might, or the Max Planck Institutes, where they're an entire institute centered around research, or the Salk Institute, and even nonprofits and think tanks. So finally, I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was helpful, and I would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for other workshops in the comments. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to continue on to part 2 to hear the live recording from our Careers in Research panel. And if you'd like more personalized guidance on academic degrees and career pathways, I'm available through another degree, as are the panelists in the part 2 video, and many, many other mentors, and we're always expanding. And you can connect with us through anotherdegree.com. Likewise, if you're an institution, we'd love to partner with you to co-develop something for your students. So please reach out and see what we can create together.